I knew I was fatigued, but I didn't know I missed the whole song. But anyway, it's good to see you back this afternoon. I hope you had a good evening. As like I said earlier, I've had the grandkids for a few days, and Paul Ball just whooped, I'm telling you. But you know, I like that. No matter how tired we get, I like that first song. He is here. No matter how we feel, he's here. You know, he abides right here. Sometimes we shut him out, but he's always here. He said he'd never leave us nor forsake us. But we just want to thank you for coming out this afternoon. Thank you for coming back. I do hope you had a good afternoon. It's just good to be in God's house. It's a joy to come to God's house. I'm glad you have a desire to come this way. Just remember, I think we still got a couple more Haiti bags. If we can get those picked up and filled up and returned, that'd be much appreciated. Remember, next Sunday, the Durham family will be here singing next Sunday morning. Also, this coming Saturday, the ladies with the ministry downtown at Boom Days. If you can help with that, let's be much prayer about that and help out there. Remember these on the prayer list. I ask you just pray for one another, uplift one another. I ask to pray for my mom as she's declining. Pray for my sister. She takes care of her, and that her health doesn't fail her. Her mental state of mind doesn't deteriorate too. It's tough being a full-time caregiver. Pray for our pastor this afternoon up at the end. We got a new church year coming up. We got some new teachers coming on board. Let's just pray for one another, uplifting up one another, encourage one another, and help where we can. Pray. We can always pray. You have any prayer needs this afternoon?
I need the church to pray for my brother Richard Kennedy. He's having some severe health problems.
Richard Kennedy. Any others this afternoon? Well, again, thank you for coming. Let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll continue on. Dear Lord God, we just want to thank you and praise you, Lord, for this day, this time of gathering. Thank you for each one to come out this way. God, I just want to thank you and praise you for your love, your mercy. God, your long summer. God, I just pray for our service. God, you just might come and meet with us tonight. God, we'll thank you and we'll praise you. God, these on the prayer list are so many needs. God, we just put them in your hands. You are the great physician. God, that you're in control. God, that with the death angels visit, I pray you'll be a God of comfort. And most of all, may we praise you in all that we do. Be with our song service. Be with the rest of the service this afternoon. For it's in Jesus' name we ask. Amen.
Everybody's throwing curveballs.
Our a minute when they come down, David will talk and we'll do something. So y'all stand in fellowship for just a moment.
Well, good evening. Good to have y'all back tonight. Hope that you had a good afternoon. Appreciate the Lord tonight, and just going to enjoy. We got to talking this morning, and Brother Robert and Miss Glenda got to go to Israel maybe a little over a month ago, and I was telling Brother Fred and them this morning. I can still remember as a kid, a lot of times a missionary would come to church. Of a Rhizophan and all, and show slides and everything of wherever they been, what was going on, and those type things. I still remember that, and so they were originally was going to plan just to do it in the back, so to speak, but we decided to do it out here where everybody could participate and see, and so I'm excited about that. A lot of times, I guess in your Bible and stuff, you might have a picture or something, which is good, of a site or something where they're talking about, or maybe in another book, but it's also good to really get to go and experience it. And I've often heard people that have went there that they makes the scriptures come more alive. Not that they're not already, but just to visualize those things that that the Lord was at and where he walked and the things that was dealing. And I think Brother Robert and them might bring some of that out tonight, because when we talk, there's certain things there that we know that he shared. I'm talking about the Lord when he was standing in certain places and was talking about those things. So, but I'll ask just Brother Robert to come on up and he can start. And I don't think there's going to be any test afterwards, but I'd say you might want to pay attention. And I love you. Appreciate you.
Bless your heart. Anybody else have a testimony or prayer request? Don't everybody talk at one time? Gary told me to make sure I turn this on, so it's buzzing. I guess that means it's on. I appreciate you coming by. It seems like I've talked twice in the back. I talked about the trip, and I hope I'm not boring folks with it, but it's such a great thing. I mean, I never thought we'd have the opportunity to go, and I'm glad. Can you hear me, Gary? I'm glad we did and took advantage of it. But it was great to know that you're walking. And Israel's a small country. I mean, it's about the size of Rhode Island, which one of the smallest states in the U.S. and but when you're traveling, it seems like it's a lot bigger because you're traveling by bus and going to different spots, and there's so many different places to see in Israel. I mean, Old Testament, New Testament, a lot of different spots to know what happened, before Christ, from the time of Adam and Eve and Abraham and different ones up through Christ and the struggles they've had in Jerusalem all these years. So it's an exciting thing. I don't want to bore you. I've got probably 15,000 pictures, but you ready for those? I've narrowed them down to like a few hundred, but I hope I kept some of the best. I know some I didn't keep, and I was trying to go through and cull out as many as I could, but maybe it'll give you a sense of what we did and where we went, and give you some excitement. If you ever get the opportunity, by all means, take it. After we decided to go, I was a little bit leery about it. wars and rumors of wars and those things. Plus, my big fat self, I didn't know if I could walk 4, 5, 6 miles a day, which some places I didn't, but we did a lot of walking, and everything. I said before, everything was uphill both ways. I don't know how we managed that, but anyway, I've got a map here of the country if you want to look at it sometime. And if you have a question I'm trying to go through fairly fast, but explain some of the stuff that you might see. But if you have a question, by all means, that's what we did in the back. I've told a lot of stuff back there about the time we were in New York at the airport, the contacts I made with a Jewish guy that we tried to fill each other out for. Didn't want to insult each other, but he sure didn't believe in Jesus Christ, and he kept talking about your Messiah, and give a smirk when he said it. And I won't go through all that. If you want to hear that story, you can feel free to ask me, because I've talked about it twice back here, but and to be brief. But a lot of these things I'll kind of go through and talk. If you have a question, you can ask. All right. Anybody have a question before we start? All right. I don't want to be in the way here. This is when we first got into Israel at the airport at Tel Aviv. Just a new experience. The flight over was 11 hours. We had a tailwind of 140 miles per hour, and it pushed us along. But on the way back, we had a headwind that was 140 miles per hour. We went there 11 hours. Coming back, it's 13 and a half hours. Okay. Am I doing something wrong, Gary? There we go. And that's going just past customs. The security there is great. I mean, if every country had security like this, if we had this kind of security at the southern border, we'd be the safest country on earth. So, but a good security. I don't know if you all remember Greg Davis. He came here to talk about ALCAP, like about gambling, a few months back in early year, January, I guess. And he was the one that we went with that led the trip. He's a Baptist preacher. He's got a talk show in Birmingham, and it's all about the Lord. I mean, he's sold out to the Lord. The Israeli flag, first thing we saw when we got there was the Israeli flag. It's on a lot of things. They're proud of their country. And this is downtown Tel Aviv. We were on the bus heading outside. One of the first things I noticed was bountiful fruit, vegetables. I mean, for an arid country, a lot of desert stuff, they can grow fruit. And we experienced that at all the different meals that we had. Tel Aviv, leaving the airport, big heavy-set guy and a beautiful lady. First afternoon, we got to a place called Netanya, which is on the coast of the Mediterranean. It's just north of Tel Aviv, and the picture don't show anything near what it actually how it was. It was a beautiful sunset right over the Mediterranean. And we headed out the next morning to Caesarea. I know everybody has heard about Caesarea, and there's actually two Caesareas. This one here, Caesarea by the sea, or Caesarea Maritino. And this got like 4 or 5 names, so yeah. But it's an old city, and a lot of ruins. And this is a place where King Herod the Great, actually built a huge complex palaces. He built a harbor, deep water harbor, that ships could come all over the world and come here and load their cargo. This is inside one of the big rooms in the old mansion. A lot of them have been destroyed and rebuilt, and excavation going on everywhere in the country. I mean, it was just like everywhere you go, they were doing digs, and this is going into the Caesarea. People working there now, digging stuff up, a little museum. And this is some of the history of that area, going back from, 4,000 years before on through some modern stuff, a lot of pottery and things. It shows a period, Roman period. This was during King Herod's time. And it goes on through all the way back to different things. A lot of the cobblestone streets and things, this area, this was a harbor. And it's just real flat, real nice. You could look out to sea and imagine those ships coming in. A lot of the ruins, the big, if you look behind the guy on the right with the walking stick, we actually called him Moses. Somebody nicknamed him Moses because he had that stick and had the beard and all that stuff. But if you look behind him, you'll see these rocks piled up. Let me see if I can get this right here. That's actually bathrooms. You would go and sit on those rocks and do your business. And we saw those in different places, but thankfully we didn't use them. But it's out in public, and I'll show you some more inside just outside the temple. The same thing, but a lot of the areas around Caesarea, King Herod built this big complex. Of course, Herod was the one that ordered all the kids killed at age 2 or 2 and under. And this is looking out through the harbor. This is you see a lot of pagan stuff there. The Romans, a lot of pagan stuff, a lot of their different gods and stuff. This was actually a well where they threw, they called it the magic well or something. They threw things down, sacrifices, and all kinds of stuff down in this old well. And a lot of the architecture, stones, it's amazing how they built some of these things because the stones were so huge. Without the equipment that we're using today, I don't know if we could even do some of the stuff they did. And I'll tell you about the temple in a minute, a big stone that was in there. But you'll see a lot of these stones that were recovered. This is an amphitheater there at the Colosseum where they did all the stuff they did in Colosseums, the battles and whatever, concerts. But they kind of modernized it and got chairs out and the sound system and all that. But it's all been uncovered since those old days. Even there, we're going on north from there. That's right above Tel Aviv, and we're headed. This is kind of an idea, maybe a map. We were in. We were in this area. This is Tel Aviv, and right here is first night, and the second night is Caesarea here. And then we went on over and went over to Mount Carmel, Megiddo, and some of those. They're right over in the more east of there. And then we ended up finally up, spent a couple of days, nights at Sea of Galilee, which is right here. And then right north of that is Caesarea Philippi, which is the other Caesarea, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. I've got a few slides of it, but it's an amazing thing. But we spent a few days traveling through there. Going this way. This is some of the countryside, and I'll talk a little bit about it. But there's a tree that grows in Israel called the tamarisk tree. I don't know if in the Bible it talks about the tamarisk tree, and a couple times it talks about King Saul. He sat under a tamarisk tree when back during the time he was looking for David and all that. Well, finally when he died, and something else we'll talk about, he actually was buried. The remains were buried under a tamarisk tree. These things, the surrounding, it's like 10 degrees cooler under those trees than it is surrounding because they hold moisture. They have deep roots. It goes down to the water, table and all that stuff. So those are really odd. But we see a lot of those trees and the olive trees and the fig, date trees. We're going to Mount Carmel here, our namesake, and they're not all Jewish and Arab and Christian folks over there. This is a sect called the Druze, D-R-U-Z-E, Druze, and they have a lot of food, restaurants and things. So we actually stopped at one of these places on the way out of Mount Carmel. This is Mount Carmel, and we were gathered there, and he was going to preach a little sermon, but there was a place over there where he normally would gather, but there were a group from Africa or something. I bet there were 50 people, and they were singing at the top of their lungs. I mean, it was just, they were so loud, but they were enjoying their salvation. They were happy. And I think they were a lot happier than we were as far as showing it in the public. But anyway, there's can you guess who that gentleman is? Mount Carmel? There's some other pictures of him. Elijah, yeah. Remember Elijah had the great battle with, Baal and God destroyed him. And and there'll be a couple more pictures of Elijah. This is overlooking the Jezreel Valley. We're right there next door to Megiddo, which they're right, real close together. And they're looking over the same valley, so that's the Jezreel Valley, looking down from Mount Carmel. And more shots of that. It's a big, wide open. And when you see some shots of the Megiddo Valley itself, part of the Jezreel, then you'll see how big, and that's where the Battle of Armageddon.
Brother Robert, is it all farmland, so to speak?
More or less, yeah. There's a lot of agriculture.
Like you see right there?
Yeah. Yeah, it's,
Fruit trees or whatever.
yeah. Back during the war, before Israel became a nation, it was just desolate. All the fruit trees had been uprooted and taken to other countries and different things. And after 1948, when Israel was declared a nation, then they could come back and read. All this has been since 1948. It was nothing like this, they say, before 1948. So it was just pretty barren and desolate. But they've done a great job. And in Canaan land was the land of milk and honey. And again, top of Mount Carmel, overlooking the statue again. There was a Catholic, a lot of these places had Catholic little churches, little, not synagogues, but little Catholic areas. They've got a big presence there. But shows Elijah with his sword. Of course, it wasn't Elijah that defeated the prophets of Baal. It was the Lord himself, just like everything else that's taken place there. This is one of the little Catholic places dedicated to the Carmelite order. It's not a shot inside the little temple thing. This is one of those restaurants we went to, the Drew's restaurant. I don't think Glenda and I ate. I think we got a $3 drink or something, a $3 Coke. But most everybody ate. One thing about the food, it was pretty good, but it was all cooked the same. It was like a lot of olive oil and a lot of different spices that are more Mediterranean spices. And a lot of people liked it, but it just wasn't a good old Southern hamburger or anything like that. And that's inside there. And this guy did eat, and that's Abraham again. Somebody a while ago mentioned, I think Gary talked about he had some hair ties around his beard. It was so long. But a lot of signs everywhere telling you exactly where you were. This is going up to Megiddo, the steps. King Solomon had a big palace there, and he had stables, horse stables, and all kinds of stuff. His big, that was one of his big places. And there's probably a sign here somewhere that talks about the southern stable. This is the city gate from Solomon's time, to Solomon's temple there, and walking on up to. And that's the northern stable for his horses, and I'm sure they were not cheap horses, but all that's been excavated to this point, and they still got a lot of stuff to do. And that's looking back down over the Jezreel Valley from the top. Some of these pictures are a little bit wider, and they're a little awkward, but it kind of gives you a panoramic shot of what it looks like. I think that valley is like 40 miles or so long, and that's the Battle of Armageddon. When it takes place, the Bible says there'll be blood up to the horse's bridle in that valley. I mean, that's a lot. But right down to the right of this, I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a crossroads to the north that actually everything in that country comes together at that one crossroads. It's Highway 60 going north and south, but you go to Lebanon this way, or Jordan this way, you go to Egypt this way, you go to Syria and Lebanon this way, and then back down to southern Israel this way. So everything kind of comes together at one point. And when they're being invaded during that time, and that's where all these people are going to come right into that valley. And there are going to be a lot of folks there going up against Israel. But, they won't succeed because the Lord's on their side. But you can see how fertile the valley is, as you said. And you're on top of this. We're 600-700 feet maybe up above the valley, so it's hard to really tell. But there's a lot of different scene. You see that major highway, it's Highway 60, going north and south through that area. We took every little bit of shade we could take because you didn't see a whole lot of shade. You may know what these are. I wouldn't have probably pomegranates. David knew, he just wouldn't. But those are everywhere. I mean, some huge ones. And again, fruit. It grew everywhere. Glenda's eyeballing that one. I thought she was going to eat it, but she didn't. That's going off of from Megiddo back toward Alpha and on toward. This is coming out. This is. Remember where Jesus, what his hometown is? Nazareth, right? This is Nazareth, and it's not the prettiest town. You know, it's not as bad as places we've been in Venezuela and Haiti and all these things. But you know, it's real commercialized, but it's not a real. And to think that that's where Christ lived was there, and the passage Jesus said, prophet in his hometown. Yeah, and that's true. And we'll see a little bit of an example of that. Shops everywhere. It's a real commercialized country. I mean, you see all pizza. We didn't see a Subway and anything like that, but not a brand name, but you know, it's all kind of little shops. If you take a look at the, this is their electrical grid. These spikes here keep you from climbing up, I guess, if you had the desire to do it. After seeing it, I definitely didn't have the desire. That's in Nazareth, going into Nazareth. There's a village there that they tried to replicate the old town of Nazareth where Jesus was, and that's kind of where we are there. It's kind of in behind this YMCA. And it's just an example, a recreation of what Jesus would have there. This is some, I guess those are olives there. They've got donkeys there, and they did the manual labor. They crush corn and whatever they need to be grinding or whatever they did. And this donkey was just walking around in circles. Kind of reminded me of myself, like I do sometimes. But here's a little farmer. They all had biblical names, and this guy was Isaac, maybe. Everybody had a name that you'd be familiar with, and they dressed in that garb. And then he had sheep and goats, and he'd give us a talk, and they all did talk about it. It ended up being Jesus. Bible. You can open the Bible up anywhere and preach Jesus. That's what Stephen, and Philip, and what Philip did with the eunuch, and that's what they did. Every opportunity it might have been one of those things where they might get paid to do it, but still they preached Jesus at every opportunity. Those are I think those are figs, but they had they had grapes and about everything you could imagine there in that one little village. And this is a grindstone for grinding corn and all that. They made pottery. A lot of their pottery was made there on the spot, and there was this is a kiln, I guess, where they dried the pottery, and they had a lot of examples of that. And again, it was all back to the old days, more of the of Nazareth. This is just outside of Nazareth, and we were talking about the Jesus said, a prophet, is not accepted in his hometown, all that, and that's where he's from. Well, the story in mine just went Matthew 16, I guess it is. I can't remember. But anyway, talked about Jesus had returned to Nazareth, and he was preaching in the synagogue, and they were trying to trap him, as they always did, and he was preaching Jesus, and he was reading the scroll. They gave him the scroll to read from Isaiah, and he read it and put it up, and he basically said, "That's me that it's talking about." Of course, that the Jews, the elders, the Pharisees and Sadducees and all them, and, they took hold of him. You remember the story? Took hold of him and carried him up to this great peak, mountain, where they were going to throw him off. Well, this is kind of the beginning of that trail going up to this. In a lot of these places, maybe not exactly the spot. A lot of them are, but in some spots you might say, well, it's either this happened here or it happened here. That's 95% of the people say it's one of those two spots. And a lot of times it absolutely happened here, but they'll tell you, you know, if it didn't. But this is one of the spots that they thought that's where this happened, but it's a trail going up. This is our guide, Richard Frieden. I've told this in the back. He was a Jew, and grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, and he was he had bar mitzvah. He got all of this Jewish stuff at 12 years old. And then in 1982 he got saved. Somebody shared the message of Christ with him, and he got saved in 1982. And then he decided, God was leading him back to the home of Jerusalem. So he moved back to Jerusalem or to Israel in 1982 and been there ever since. And knowledgeable, this guy knows. But anyway, this is the top of the ridge where the local people say this is where they carried Jesus to throw him off. And the Bible says that they carried him, attempted to throw him off, and then he just walked back through the midst of them, and they didn't even realize he was gone. He pretty much disappeared. Now, there's a sign here that actually says that he actually jumped off here, which, that's not biblical. And so you got to be careful of things that you see and hear. But this is a pretty good drop. This is still part of the Jezreel Valley, but it's a pretty high spot, and that would be a place if you were going to throw somebody off. I think Linda was thinking about throwing me off at this point. But, and there's Moses again, and there's some people that were on the trip with us, and they call it Mount of Precipice, the Leaping Mountain. And this guy was from Birmingham. He was a character. He would fit right in with us here, back into Nazareth. That's the Netanyahu, who is the prime minister still, and his signs were everywhere. They think the world of him. Matter of fact, from the people on the bus and people that we met, they think a lot of Donald Trump. Trump had made Jerusalem, announced that Jerusalem was going to be the capital after all these years, and Richard and a lot of those folks we ran into, they think the world of U.S. and Trump. But this guy, if you remember in 1976 maybe, some Israelis a plane was hijacked in Tel Aviv from these Muslim and Lebanese hijackers. They ended up in Africa and a place called Entebbe, and it's a real famous thing where movies about Entebbe and all this stuff. Well, they were kidnapped and brought there. Well, this guy's brother, Netanyahu's brother, Yanni, was over the military at that time, and they went in and did a raid. And when there was 208 hostages, and 207 of them survived the raid, and Yanni was the only one of the Israeli soldiers that got killed. His brother got killed in that raid. And that's going in toward Tiberias, going toward the Sea of Galilee. And this is not the Dome of the Rock. This is Muslims have presence pretty much everywhere, but this is a little dome, I guess a Muslim dome there in Nazareth. This is going into the hotel where we stayed at Magdala, town of Mary Magdalene. And this is the Sea of Galilee, the famous Sea of Galilee. And this is on the western side. We go out and see. We watched the sunrise a couple of mornings there. Picked up rocks and seashells, and that's some little caves up on the side of the ridge there above it.
Did you actually get to go out on the sea?
We did. Now, I tried not to put any videos in here because we've got videos of actually being out on the boat and traveling and singing songs. We sang, I guess, Amazing Grace or something. I don't remember, but we sang a lot. A lot of these places we would lead. This is there at Magdala. The hotel that we stayed in was actually built on the ruins of Magdala, and right there beside it. So you could look out your window and see all these ruins. This was right beside this Catholic thing here where they were still digging. That goes back, the Sea of Galilee behind this little place, and flowers. And this is Pretty sure this is Mary Magdalene and Jesus, like a statue of that. Now, we were looking at it yesterday, and I wasn't really thinking, but yeah, David mentioned Mary Magdalene, and that makes sense because that's where she was from. And she was a follower of Jesus. But a lot of statues and things like that around that place, and that's around sunset. This is some of the ruins. This was the next morning as we were going to a different spot, but you can see the tapestry and stuff on this was the floor and how it's all buckled, but all these cobblestones and little intricate designs. I mean, this was, 2,000 years ago or more than that when this is a synagogue, and there's some of the things in there that they've uncovered. And all this right there at the hotel. I don't think you could do that in the United States, build a hotel on ancient ruins. But all this is in Magdala. And that talks about the synagogue right there that we were looking at, and the stones and those things, pots whatever they did with those, and sign there. Then we were headed to the Sea of Galilee down to, this is where the boat is. It's called the 2,000-year boat. They found it, they uncovered it. It was in the water, and the water, Sea of Galilee had gone down at a certain point. Part of it was showing, so they dug it up, and you'll see pictures of it, but there it is there. And that's at least a 2,000-year, and they said, possibly this could be a boat that the disciples, Peter and John and James, and that might have been one of their fishing boats, but it's definitely from that same time frame. The mystery of the 2,000-year-old boat. But it was pretty interesting. And that's going out to get on the boat to take the tour of the ride. And it was real calm, and it was a great time. And all this is right around that same area of the Galilee courtyard. We'll go from here to Capernaum. But in this area, Magdala, Capernaum, around the Sea of Galilee, that's where Jesus, his ministry, that's most of his ministry, a lot of his ministry was right there. I'd say majority of his miracles were in that area. This is leaving Galilee, going up to Caesarea Philippi. This is up north of the country. It's in the Valley of Dan, and this is the beginning of the Jordan River, basically. And Caesarea Philippi, I think Jesus was there twice, from what I gather. And the second time that he was there, and let me go a little bit further. This is the springs. There's a lot of springs right there. If you look at right here is the several caves and stuff. Well, this was a pagan temple back during that time. It was a temple of Pan, P-A-N. Pan was the goat god or something, and they had all that stuff. And they believed, and they actually had signs of, this is the entrance to the underworld. This is the gates of Hades, is what they call this. And you can see the springs and all that, and the water coming out of the mountain there. And you go up into the little temple. Again, it was a pagan thing. Philippi is named after Herod's son, King Herod Philip, yeah. And and they had a big presence there too. But this goes, and I guess that was the only picture there. Anyway, right there against this, and I've got a bunch of pictures that shows big pits and shows more of the cave and that kind of thing. And if you remember, I'm thinking it's Matthew 16, where Jesus and the disciples were there at Caesarea Philippi, and they were sitting there talking. It was right there at this place. This was Caesarea Philippi, and he asked the disciples, "Who do men think I am?" And one said, "Well, some think you're Elijah, and some think you're John the Baptist, and different ones." And he said, "Well, who do you think I am?" Looking at Peter, and Peter said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And that was the answer. Jesus said, "Flesh and blood didn't tell you this. This came from my Father in heaven." And he said, upon this statement, and people think, well, Simon Peter's the first pope of the church. Well, he wasn't saying, "Hey, Peter, upon this, you saying this, I'm going to make you the pope of my church." That's not what he said. He said, upon this statement of your profession, that's what I'm going to build my church. And then right here where the gates of Hades, and I could imagine them turning around, and Jesus said, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I mean, that's chilling to think about Jesus actually being there and saying those words. And these gates of hell, the gates of hell, the spirit world will not prevail against my church. And this is coming out of there into Capernaum. We had to stop and eat lunch. And this is a little restaurant right on the Sea of Galilee, and a little spring coming out of the wall. It's a place called David's Harp. And this is kind of what they served. It was whole fish. And, I forgot what we had. We had a falafel or something, but Greg went for the fish. Going into the Capernaum, which was got the sign of the town of Jesus, and there's a lot of stuff to see there. That's where Jesus spent a lot of time in Capernaum. And again, you see the same type streets that you see about everywhere, all the ruins, the big stones, the synagogue. And something interesting right here, around here, this is ruins of the synagogue and stuff right around, and then this is a modern museum and that kind of thing. If you'll look on past this, all these ruins, you'll see all this, and we're going to pass it, and I'll tell you about that. See all the big blocks and things they found during the excavation of that area. And this is that little museum thing. All this stuff underneath it is believed, 90-something% sure that this was Peter's house. Right underneath this was built on top of it. And you can see the rooms where they've excavated. And, you remember the miracle that happened. Of course, Jesus stayed with Peter while he was in that area. And you remember what happened? Peter's mother-in-law got sick. And that was one of his first miracles was healing Peter's mother-in-law. And I'm pretty sure this is where it happened right here. And you can see all the different rooms that were uncovered right there. And it's kind of hard to see with the shadows. But this goes back out into the streets. And we're going down by the Sea of Galilee. And this is Peter, Simon Peter, statue, I guess, dedicated to him because that was where he lived. Beautiful Sea of Galilee, just beautiful place. So many things to see. This is coming out of Capernaum. There's a sign here that says the homeless Jesus is what the sign says there. Beside this is supposed to be Jesus. But he said he had no place to lay his head. I mean, he was basically homeless, not like you consider today, but that's what this is called, the homeless Jesus. And all this, the hometown of, or the not hometown, but the home of Jesus while he was in the Sea of Galilee area. Matthew 5, the Beatitudes. This is where Jesus was there, the Mount of Beatitudes. And there's a little Catholic building there. And people were coming in there singing, real great acoustics. And we were in there, and one person would come in, and they'd sing into this little dome and stuff, and just lovely. In different languages. It was one girl was from Africa somewhere, and she was singing in their language, and it was just, I've got some of that on video. I just didn't include it. But this is still the Mount of Beatitudes. They've got these little things along the sidewalk. You make a loop around it. And the blessed are, blessed are those who are persecuted. Blessed are the peacemakers. And these been there so long, you can see part of the writing is chipped away and things. I don't know why they don't redo those, but there's one for every one of the Beatitudes that Jesus gave. A little walk, around, and you're right there on the Sea of Galilee looking over it, and it's just awesome. Let anyone who thirsts come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture says, rivers of living water flow from within him. John 7. And blessed are those, the meek. And again, looking out over, blessed are those who mourn. We often experience that. This is going back out and the Sea of Galilee there. This is back at Magdala at the hotel. This is out beside that Catholic. That's the expectant mother, Mary, I guess. And there were a lot of Catholics believing all those statues and different things, and Mary. And it was quite an elaborate place. I mean, this was just beautiful. Big high ceilings. This was a Catholic priest. He was from Ireland and had the Irish brogue. And he didn't try to convert us, though. So that's a synagogue actually underneath that chapel. And, we were down there listening to him. This is another replica of the boat. This will be about the size of a boat that Jesus and the disciples would fish from. This was right there in that chapel overlooking the Sea of Galilee. There was an infinity pool right there behind it that goes off into nothing, and you can see the Sea of Galilee behind it. This is a group shot looking for that. Back to the Sea of Galilee. And this was, I guess, the last morning we were there, and sunrise. This is sunrising over the Sea of Galilee. I've got some video of that too, but calm. The only ripples in the water was, for some reason, these jet skiers decided that they wanted to interrupt us, our meditation that morning, so they'd come out and turn donuts and stuff, so you can see one of them there. But it didn't really affect us because we were not there for watching their show. But this was the sunrise. We left there and went to a place called Bet-Shean, which was one of the oldest cities in Israel. I mean, this thing is several thousand years old. Went through a lot, starting with the Phoenicians back in those days, and then went through different hands, and then finally Rome settled it, and Herod built a temple there. And you can see some of the ruins and stuff there. And I mean, this was a hard. It was real extensive. It was one of the biggest spots that we went to. You can see all the ruins, all the columns and different things, the mountain behind it, and all this was built by Rome on this particular spot. These are the baths. They had hot baths, and water would come in from their channels and things, come in through those little channels, holes, and it settled on those stones, and it would heat up, and they actually had baths there. And all kind of stuff. There are signs that show exactly what. This is some of the signs that tells about the baths and the massage thing and all kind of different activities that were going on there. This is kind of a layout of all the baths, model of the bathhouse. These are utensils, things they used in those days for their bathroom and things. So it's not something. I think I'd want to use now. This is like a manicure set. This is for personal hygiene, ear scoop and nail cleaner. Could you imagine putting that thing? And then this was used to pour water, and then this was that's an oil flask, and this was a pair of something from scraping the oil off. They when they bathe, after they had used oil stuff, and they take these things and scrape all the oil and stuff off of them after they did that. Anyway, some more shots of those. All the water channels where the water came in. Right up here are more of those restrooms, and you see the sign "Public Restrooms." These are public restrooms. Way out in the public, yeah. And it was just a neat place. Here was part of the city up high. This is one of the couple things I didn't do. Glenda made the trip up there, but my knees and hips were hurt so bad. And it was just right up those steps, but I don't know how far it was, probably a quarter mile, but it looked to me like it was about 500 miles up there. So she made the trip up to that. So these are date palms. They're all over the country, out beside the roads and stuff. They have dates on them. This is Jordan River. This is where we stopped, and there were 18 of us in the group. We had 21. I had 2 guys from Africa and a little 8 or 10-year-old boy that wanted to get baptized with us. So this is where we got baptized. This little, Jordan River is not that huge, but it's wider at some spots, but this is one of the more narrow ones. But this is where a lot of people get baptized because of the easy access. Let's leave them there. That's one of the meals headed toward the Dead Sea.
When you was at the Jordan there, is that where maybe John, did they show area where maybe John baptized?
that was another one of those things, we probably here, but it could be here. But there was only 2 or 3 places that, that it was, yeah, because of the landscape. And
It's nicely looking.
yeah, it is. But Jordan, the country of Jordan is on the other side of the river. And we could see machine gun nests and stuff. I mean, you could see Jordan and see the military over there, and you didn't want to cross the river and all that. But yeah, they said that's a good possibility. That particular place or somewhere within that, that little area was it. This is Qumran. It's going on down to the Dead Sea. This is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And you'll see some caves up in those rocks. And you see the caves. And I actually found some more just a few weeks ago. I read that they had gone in and found some, not scrolls, but more tools. A lot of tools they found in some of those. And these are little deer. Bible talks about the hinds. In the Bible, Psalm 18, I think, talks about the hinds and God, how he directs their path. And what these things do, they're 4-legged, but when they move, the back 2 legs come to where the front 2 legs were, and they only make 1 set of tracks. It's like a person, like two legs here, 2 legs there, but it's 4 feet, but they're all in the same. Their back feet come up to where their front feet were when they make the jump. So Psalm 18 talks about the hinds and how God directs their path and all that. Read it. I think it's Psalm 18. But there are several of those there, and they were amazing little creatures. You can see some of the caves up in those areas. This is the area where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. Another big one there. This is going back out of there, going up toward the Dead Sea. This is a menorah, the candle they use in the Passover services. I mean, menorah and some of those things are well known as far as the Jewish tradition and all that. This is the Dead Sea. All the water from the Jordan River and the Sea of Galilee drains into the Dead Sea, and it stops. It don't go anywhere. It just stays there. And the salinity of the water is like 33, 34%. And you don't swim in the Dead Sea, you float. And I mean like a fishing cork. This is Masada, going in to the Dead Sea, and we will go back by there on the way out. But again, the Dead Sea, you don't open your eyes in the Dead Sea. It'll burn. And you need to rinse off. But this is a little beach there. And we went in for a swim, or a float, and it was just a neat little place. You see how going to floating there. But this is the hotel room overlooking the Dead Sea, and that's an amazing place. I mean, if you look on this map and see how big the Dead Sea actually is, it's this big, long body of water there, and it's you don't see any boats out there because the buoyancy. I mean, they have research vessels that go, but you don't see any people jet skiing and stuff like fishing because nothing lives in it. First of all, you couldn't catch a fish. But this is overlooking the Dead Sea there. And that's checking out of our hotel, I guess. And this is Masada on the way back around to go into it. I think everybody's familiar with Masada. But, it's this big outcropping of rock, and that the visitor center shows kind of how it looks. But Dead Sea is 1,400 feet below sea level, or a little more. And you can go back to Masada and climb to the top of it, which is 1,000 feet, and you're still almost 500 feet below sea level at the top of this big mountain. And this was where, in about, Rome sacked Jerusalem in AD 70. And these were folks, maybe Essenes or just a sect of Jews that weren't going along. They didn't want to be slaves, which who could blame them? And they ended up going to this mountain, and they went up it, and they stayed there for, I think, 2.5 years. There were almost 1,000 of them, and Rome kept, for all those years, they kept trying to get up there to them, and they couldn't get up. And I'll show you a little bit here in a minute. But you're overlooking, you see the Dead Sea, you see all the ruins. This was a self-sufficient place because they had cisterns where the water, they had enough water from runoff, which they pump up to it somehow, some kind of hand pumps or something, to those cisterns that they could last 2 years with the water supply they had, which is amazing in the desert. And this is the top. If you'll look right here, the only path up is a place called the Snake Path. And, it was around in those days, but, one or two people could defend the whole thing from the top of that because it was this wide. An army couldn't go up it, so it was well defended by that. And so the Snake Path, and it still exists. If you look over here, this is where Rome encamped for 2 years trying to get up that mountain. This whole area right here is still there. And they built, if you look right here, they actually hauled dirt, rock, and everything and built up a slope there to gain access. They kept, day by day, they'd build it a little higher, a little higher, a little higher, and to the point of they finally got to, where they could actually have ladders or something that would breach the top. And that's when these Jews ended up, give it up pretty much. They didn't want to be slaves, so they ended up committing suicide. I think 920 or so killed it. Well, they chose. Right. They chose lots, and one person did most of them, and then he killed his buddies, and then himself or whatever. But that's where all that happened. You can see again the Snake Path, which nobody really could get up. They still walk up it today, one by one, and you can see the ramp they were building. And this is the encampment over here that Rome had set up. Again, you see that in almost all these. And they had all kind of things up there from storehouses to supplies. And this was a place where there's a scribe that's in here. You know what a scribe is. He recreates the word. I mean, he's sitting there copying, word by word. And this was a scribe, and he travels up that mountain every day to go to work, transcribing the word. And they've got a cable. How we got up there? We didn't walk. It was a cable car, which you might see a little bit of that. But anyway, this guy is dedicated, as they all are. That's some of the cisterns and things where they stored water and supplies. But this is just an amazing thing. 1,000 feet above the Dead Sea. And that's in the cable car going back down, I guess. We left there and went to a place called En-Gedi. And this is a paradise. We're in the desert, but this is a paradise. In Samuel, several books, it talks about En-Gedi, where the springs, the waterfalls and all that. This is where David spent a lot of time. They had the waterfalls, all the water. This is actually where Saul encamped. And we know the story that Saul was after David, and Saul was trying to kill him. But Saul ended up in the same area, in a cave here, and this just real close to this. And David had come in unannounced, and Saul was asleep, and David cut his tassels off his robe and let him know that he could have killed him at any time, but he didn't because he respected God, and that was God's man. Saul was God's king. So he showed him, I could have killed you any time. But Saul ended up with a much worse fate after that. This is going up toward the little waterfalls, and there's one of them there. And it's just a lush area. Read I think it's Psalm 104. David talks about, I think he wrote this psalm specifically for this area. Read it, Psalm 104. And we'll leave there. And there's a lot more. I've got a ton of pictures, but we'll go back to some of my ancestors here. This is a place going into Jerusalem called Genesis Land. And we did a camel ride. Glenda Road I did, and I figured my bones would not allow me to, and I'm glad I did. This guy was one of the sheep herders or whatever, camel herders. And I took his picture because if you've ever seen the movie Clint Eastwood, Outlaw Josie Wells, this guy looks just like anyway. And I said, you know who you look like? He said, yeah, the guy from Outlaw Josie Wells. Anyway, that's Glenda on the camel. We left there, went up from the camel ride over to Abraham's tent. We had dinner with Abraham, and this was outside tent, and they fed us. That's me and Abraham. And we left there. This is back in Jerusalem. This is we were going to Hezekiah's tunnel. That's where Hezekiah built the tunnel to bring water and stuff into Jerusalem back during when he built the temple back. This is the city of David. And I mean, just everything's so built up. This is where David's palace was, and you see how his palace was about there. They've uncovered it, and they've got a lot of excavation going on. But you can see, David's sin with Bathsheba. It said, they weren't at war, so David was, doing things that kings shouldn't be doing. But he was at home, and he was looking down from, and you could look down. There was a lot of these houses and all these places just like this, where you could imagine David looking from his place down on the rooftop and could see Bathsheba bathing. And you can see this whole area here was just a lot of those, and they're military leaders and different ones lived in those houses. The city of David is just all built up. That's just outside the temple. And flowers everywhere. This is going in toward Hezekiah's tunnel, and a lot of the ruins and things there, a lot of the big cornerstones and different places, remains of King David's palace. This is a room that actually got burned, and a lot of soot stuff on the floor. And this is going down into the Warren shaft or the Hezekiah's tunnel. I've just got this picture. That's inside the tunnel, going down the old drainage system and where the water came in. And it was, again, up and down, up and down. You climb a set of stairs, you go down, you go to the bottom. Here, I did this position quite a bit. Every time we'd come to a stop, I got to sit down. So this is outside the temple going into Siloam's pool. They were doing excavation on it. And this is right outside the temple. There's 7 gates going into the temple. One's not in use. That's the beautiful gate, or the eastern gate. And the Muslims closed it up because they knew the prophecy that Jesus would come back, when he came back and go into the eastern gate. And so they closed it up, and they actually built a cemetery right outside of it. And they thought, well, Jews are not going through the cemetery. Jesus won't, but Jesus said he was Lord over death and grave, but he was walking down to that, and it's spelled different. Some of their spellings are a little bit off. That's Siloam's pool, and that's where they're doing the excavation. Well, last week they dug down in there, and they actually came across the steps down into the pool at Siloam. That's where Jesus healed the guy with the blind guy. He reached down and got some mud and spit on it. You remember the story? And gave me a sight back. Well, that's where that happened. And they just uncovered the steps down to the pool this last week or so. Leaving there, we went over to a place. This is all olive wood. And they let us have the run of the place. And everything in there was made out of olive wood from Bethlehem. And they actually fed us pizza and drinks. And this is going back around the temple. There's so much to see around the temple. This is in Bethlehem. This is another one of those things that I regretted, but like I'm standing here now, I can't hardly walk. But we did walk several miles before this, and I told Linda, I said, you go on, because I don't think I'm going to make it to walk another 3 or 4 miles in Bethlehem. I do regret it, but anyway, she took all these pictures. But this is in Bethlehem, the birthplace of Christ. And beautiful. This is Palestine is controlled. The Jews are not in control of this. Jews cannot go to Bethlehem. There's a big sign there that says Jews not allowed. And so the bus driver and the tour guide, they had to change going into Bethlehem because the Jewish guide and the bus driver was not allowed. But anyway, these are just tremendous things to see there in Bethlehem. I'm trying to hurry. This is like a Wailing Wall where you put prayers and stuff, for prayer. And this, I think this is the same thing. You see the little bits of paper where people left their prayers. And again, I won't go into the thing with, the birth of Christ as far as, we know that. The stable, most of those houses, it wasn't actually a stable like you go to, on Gunsmoke, you go, all the horses and stuff are stable. Each house had a place underneath the house where their livestock would be. And that's where I think Jesus was actually born, is in one of those houses below the house. That Volkswagen made a left turn, and he should turn right, because I think that tree has grown up. They didn't have a Starbucks; they had a Stars and Bucks. And this is down in Bethlehem, Christmas restaurant, and this is where Jesus. They say this is one of those places where they think he was actually born, in this spot. You could get down and sometimes silence is golden. I should have went back, I guess. But anyway, I had several pictures of this, and I guess that's the only one I put in. A lot of language, I have no clue what it says. There's Catholic priests and different ones. A little mural with tiles. This is the west wall of Jerusalem, the Wailing Wall. This was after the Rome sacked the temple, and it's been sacked so many times and torn down from Hezekiah's day on up, Solomon. But when Rome sacked it, this was the only thing left standing, was that western wall. And you see, they call it the Wailing Wall. That's where Jews go. That's their most holy place. Now that the Dome of the Rock is covered up, the Mount Moriah, they're on the Temple Dome, or Temple Mount. But you see everybody praying, and men to the left, women to the right. I think that's where David picked up his altar prayer from, is the Jews. But you can see people standing around. It was just a social thing, but people, and they had something. They'd pray and they wouldn't walk away. They'd be facing the wall and they'd walk backwards on the fall. Walk backwards. They wouldn't take their eyes off the wall until they got on so far back, and then they'd turn around. But they were reverent. You think I could get by with one of those outfits, church next week? I know it's getting late. I'm sorry. This little thing on the top, the Orthodox Jews, they call perfectory or something like that. And their little houses where they put their scroll, the Word of God, and and the Bible talks about keeping the Word close, on your head. They got one on their wrist, one on the head. So anyway, that walkway up there's a temple going into the Temple Mount. And we went around and climbed up there, and we actually went out on the Temple Mount. The sign said you can't go, according to Torah law, entering the Temple Mount area is strictly forbidden due to the holiness of the site. But we went, and I don't know who that's referring to, but the chief rabbi of Israel. But going into the Temple Mount, some more ruins, taking this tunnel, you can look down on the Wailing Wall. You can see where it splits, women to the right and men to the left. And this is actually on the Temple Mount. Most everything up there is Muslim, and this is a Muslim synagogue or school. And a lot of those ruins, and it's just flat. Told somebody that Israel is a country of valleys and hills and valleys. About the only flat place I found like this is the Temple Mount. It was perfectly flat, but everything else is pretty much hilly. But you can tell how much this has changed over the years. Before the dome, Muslims moved in, and there's the Dome of the Rock. That's where Mount Moriah is what it's sitting on. That's where Abraham went up Mount Moriah to sacrifice Isaac. And of course, Abraham he means a lot to Muslims as well as Christians and Jews. So that's kind of the center, is that Mount Moriah where that temple is built. And when Jesus returns, that temple that Dome of the Rock won't be there. Olive trees. That's a tamarisk tree I talked about earlier about, it's so much cooler. You notice where I'm at? I'm under the tree. And I'm like Saul in that point, you know, sought shelter under the tree. I have no idea what that is. And this is a Jewish, a Muslim mosque, temple, a dead olive tree. That's used to be, I don't know if Muslims have taken it over, but that was David's tower back in the old temple. We couldn't go in any of the Muslim stuff, but I actually peeked in the window and took, this is a Muslim mosque. I took a couple of pictures there. All the presence on the mount is Israeli. It's all, they're in charge of security, and they do a good job. That's going into the Dome of the Rock. That's some more tamarisk trees and some those other fruit trees. That's military, the Israeli military. They're all over the place. Going up this is kind of in the Temple Mount, above the southern steps of the temple, but up on the Temple Mount. And that's the other, they've got the Dome of the Rock, and then they've got this other dome, Gaza or something like that. It's another Muslim temple. There's the famous temple of the Dome of the Rock. Again, enjoy it while you can, because it won't be there forever. Big flat. And this is going down looking down the southern steps, or the inside the temple, at the top of the southern steps. Beautiful gate, the eastern gate where Jesus will return. This is inside the Temple Mount, looking down at the beautiful gate, or the eastern gate. And you see how they've sealed it up. You know, that's only, out of 7 gates, that's the only one that you can't enter now. More of the dome, olive trees everywhere, the tamarisk trees, and that's a female Israeli. It's going down through. I said it was commercialized. This is candy. You can stop and buy candy along the route. This is down in, it's off the Temple Mount, back down in at the Wailing Wall, going out. This is a recreation of what the temple looked like and Jerusalem looked like back, several hundred years ago. This is the southern steps. That was one of those places where it had been covered up for so many years. They finally excavated it, and these steps are right there at the southern side of the temple. And right around the corner here to the right is the beautiful gate, the eastern gate. And these steps, when they uncovered them, I told them back there, some of the steps are about this wide, and the next step would be this wide, and then go back this and that and this and that. And they explained that the reason they did that was when you walked up there, you were entering the temple, and you're supposed to be reverent. So if you alternated the steps, you had to look down in a humble fashion as you walked, looking down, and that was being humble in front of God. So that's the way those things were. A lot of pictures of the southern steps, which is
That's where Peter preached from.
right, yeah. And it's probably likely Jesus preached from the southern steps.
That's where he healed the lame man, I believe it was.
Yeah. And and this going down some of the ruins. This is some more stuff they had just uncovered. So how big the blocks are. This is there at the Wailing Wall on the women's side, and that's the ladies' side. And that's some of the ladies that were with us. You had to cover your head there because of, reverence. Men had caps or yarmulkes on or whatever. In Jerusalem, just the city of Jerusalem, a lot of these Orthodox Jews were everywhere, and they do their rituals and their traditions and all that stuff. See how big the rocks are. And I'm trying to just go ahead and go through these. This is in the museum in Jerusalem, the Israeli museum, and they had a ton of stuff. Actually, this is where the Dead Sea Scrolls are housed. Most of them, anyway. There are a few that are out. This is on the road up to Mount Olive, and this is the temple wall. This is going up Mount Olive, and you can see the graves right below on the way down to the Garden of Gethsemane. You see the dome, you're looking west, because you're looking out of the temple, you're looking east, and you're looking west toward the temple, and all the graves, Muslims think, well, we're going to stop Jesus. So all that, and then you walk out from there down to the Garden of Gethsemane, down the trail, right past those graves and things. And you come out at the Garden of Gethsemane right here. That's where Jesus prayed before, the crucifixion, and before his trial. This is the likely spot of where he actually prayed. There was not a tree there. And all those trees there are like 2,000 years old. That's amazing. They were probably there when Jesus was there. Yosemite. Resting place, that's our guide, Richard. Just a place to stop and rest. There's a sanctuary or a chapel for the Catholic Church, and it was, I think that's one of the places where we saw the sign that says silence. But some places we actually could sing. You couldn't talk, but you could sing, and have good acoustics. This is Friends of the Jews. It was a Christian organization that supported the Jews and fought for them. This is downtown, Old Jerusalem, where all these umbrellas. If you've ever been to Chattanooga, up off of Market Street, there's an alley that's got these same type umbrellas up in Chattanooga. That's a laid back. That's a more modern Jew. He's got his tassels and stuff, but he don't have the full rig. This is at the museum. They've got a replica of the old Temple Mount and the temple. You can see all the stuff that's back after the second temple, I think. But all the rocks and this thing here, and I'll try to go through. When they read the scrolls, they're scrolled, and they come and they read Prophet Isaiah, whatever. Well, if you notice, the scrolls have this kind of top on the scrolls, and that's what this is. It's a replica of the scrolls, and everything's housed underneath this. And again, this is where the Dead Sea Scrolls and all the stuff were stored. But that is the replica of the scrolls, the Torah and the Holy Word. I stopped and got a bottle of pear juice. If you've never had pear juice, don't try it. Especially if it's $4, I think, a bottle or whatever. Here's where the Dead Sea, and you couldn't take pictures inside this. You're not supposed to, so we only took very few at the very first. This is outside the temple at the Jaffa Gate. There's another one of those 6 gates that are open, along with the Dung Gate. We first went into the Western Wall through the Dung Gate, and commercialism. Took a break, went to the Pizzadelic place to eat lunch. That's another menorah. I know that's not the end. We still haven't got to the garden tomb or anything like that, but I don't know what. Gary, will it push back there for you? Okay. All right. If we want to see more further, we'll go on. Can you play that one little video real fast? The baptism thing, like 3 minutes long. There it is. This is where we were actually did the baptism in the Jordan River. And there were 21 of us total, counting the Africans that were with us. But can you hit play or something? Probably can't hear it, but anyway, this we're starting the baptism there. Glenda's coming down, and I cut most of everything out except me and her and those people from Africa. And it had volume, but I think he's streaming, so volume probably don't work. But that's a special place to be baptized where Jesus was baptized. That's Greg on the right, and Richard, the guide, Jewish Christian. And if there's one thing that Richard loved, it's the Messiah. That was his word, the Messiah. And And I'd ask him, I said, how you doing, Richard? He said, I'm loved. The Messiah loves me. Messiah this, Messiah that. Water's not real crystal clear, but it's, for where you're at, it's, here's one of those guys that just walked up. He was, I don't know if he was with a group or by himself. He can baptize, appointed. And so they asked him if he was saved, if he knew Jesus. Richard asked him, do you know the Messiah? He said, yes. So baptized him. And we're totally leaving out the garden tomb and some more stuff in the temple. But, again, we're running late. This little boy, the mother asked if her son could be baptized with us. So he was, I don't know, 8 years old, maybe 8 or 10 years old. And they questioned him, asked him if he was saved, if he knew Jesus. And he did. So they put him right under. I'm over here with the camera. And then after we did that, then I took my turn. But these people were excited to get the opportunity. This is another one that came up. He wanted to be baptized. Good news. Jesus said, go forth and spread the good news to every nation, every tongue, every place. And he was overjoyed to be baptized. And then I give the camera to one of the guys. And then after this, the guide, Richard, he had been baptized before, of course. He's led hundreds of trips to Israel, but he had never been baptized with a group. So after I got through there, we asked him if he would be baptized with our group. So he did, and which was the first time with a group after all these many years. The robes they had, we bought the robes and the towels, and one size fit all. Well, they didn't quite fit all. They were snug with all, but anyway. But he was as excited as the first time, but, like this was his first time getting baptized. His public profession, even though he had done it before, and with people that he cared for. Anyway. So I know it's way late. I'm sorry. I didn't figure it'd go quite this long, but again, left out. We missed some stuff. But if you're interested in seeing those, I'll give you a link or something that you can look at the rest of them in the garden tomb and all those things. Anyway, I appreciate it. Thanks for your patience, and I hope you enjoyed this little map here of Israel and things. If you want to look, if you got time, but most of you want to go home. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Robert.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. Got to see some things. Hopefully someday we might get to go, but if not, we still got to see some of it, and it's good to hear about that. I always have to throw in, I wondered if either you or Glenda was over there telling them to hold them down just a little bit longer, huh? In the water, but I enjoyed it, and hope you did too tonight, and I appreciate them sharing that with us. And their trip, and just hopefully when you're reading your scripture and everything, you can remember some of the slides and all. But I appreciate you tonight. Love you. Someone have a word or anything before we dismiss tonight? Well, if not, we'll stand to our feet tonight and be dismissed. I want you to have a good week, okay? Be careful and all. Brother Kenny, would you kindly dismiss?